dashboard. That guy's got to come out. So here we go. Okay, first we're going to take off the trim panels. These should just pop right off. There is a couple of plugs. This is for the rear defrost, which we no longer need. That's one way of doing it. Okay, now this car has power pedals. You can move the pedals further forward or back. Eventually, the driver's seat is going to sit pretty far back. So we want to bring the pedals back this way as far as we can. Turn it on. That moves it that way. And that's the extreme this way. Now, we can take this panel off. And by the clicking, it sounds like our battery has finally died. Okay. All right, next we pull the bezel off for the speedometer, which there's supposed to be some screws up here and some screws down here, but it looks like somebody's been in here playing around already because there's no screws. So, all right, Ford sure likes their 7mm screws. So there's one there, there's one here. And we get the headlight switches. Got a couple of pins here, and out it comes. Next, we're going to pull out the gauge cluster. Now, I know some GM vehicles do not like to run without the gauge cluster. And I know from previous experience that Ford is an electrical anomaly. They wrote a lot of stuff through the cluster. So I don't know if we're going to have to mount the cluster back in after we get the cage in to make the car run right. But we're going to save it regardless because I'd hate to throw it out and then, oh, we need it. So, okay. Now, before we pull this out, there is a shift indicator down here that we are no longer going to need. So that gets eliminated. Now, before you panic, oh, how do you know what gear you're in? You can feel the different gear detents as you shift through the gears. Oops. Too much force. Too much force. Disconnect our plugs. Save our parts. Okay, next, there's a trim panel up here that has to come off. Now this is just held on by little pop clips underneath. So if you come underneath, pry up, this panel will come up. And out. Now there's a light sensor over here that has to be unplugged. If you just push up on the clip, it should unclip from the sensor. Now, this can be removed. Next, on the bottom side of the dashboard, there's a 15mm bolt that comes out. There's one on each side. Actually, I lied. The one over here is a 10 millimeter. Next, you come under the driver's side by the pedals. There's 4 13 millimeters that can come out. These hold a brace that hold the bottom of the dashboard. Now you can remove your brace. Next, if you look in the driver's side of the dash, behind where the vent was, there is a bolt right down here. That is a 15 millimeter. You're going to need a deep weld. Next, take a 7 millimeter and remove the parking brake release. There's a plastic cover under the steering column that is just held in by push pins. Simply pull down and the cover will come off. Next, since we're down here, there's some 8 millimeter bolts holding on this metal pan. Remove the metal pan. There's 4 13 millimeter bolts holding the steering column to the dashboard. We have to take those out. And let your column drop down. Next, there are 3 8 millimeter bolts. There's one here, one straight down from here, and one on the driver's side. Take each of those bolts out. Now your dashboard will start to come free. Inside the engine compartment, next to the brake booster, there's a plug you have to disconnect. It has a 10 millimeter bolt in the center. Remove the bolt. With the bolt threaded all the way out, unplug the harness. Remove the weather-tight trim ring. Depress the tabs and push the harness through the firewall. Repeat that procedure for the harness immediately outside of that. Remove the 10 millimeter bolt and unplug the harness. Depress the tabs and push the harness inside the firewall. At this point, now you can move your dashboard down to give yourself a little more working room. On the driver's kick panel, there are 2 plugs that need to be removed that have a simple push style release. Remove those 2 plugs. Slide your dashboard away. On the top of the steering column, there's an orange and red plug which you can disconnect. Since you're here, there's a module on the transmission tunnel that has a forward plug that needs to be disconnected. Simply squeeze, and out it comes. On the bottom side of the steering column, there are 3 7/32 bolts. Remove those. Next, remove the tilt lever and carefully remove the bottom cover. Next, there's some plugs on the bottom of the steering column to remove. This plug has a pin, tab you just push in, remove. This has a tab, you push in and remove. This one has a tab, you push in and remove. Next is your ignition switch. This is a tab you push in and remove. On the back side of your multifunction switch is another pin. There's another plug up here. Back on the passenger footwell, there's several plugs that need to be removed. This has a push pin that you just press, it comes undone. And there's 2 plugs down here that operate the same way the plugs on the driver's side work. On the passenger side of the dashboard, down by the passenger footwell, there are 2 10mm bolts that need to be taken off for ground wires. Once your 2 ground wires are removed, there's a vacuum connection in the center of the dashboard that needs to be unplugged. Simply lift up on the clip and pull it apart. And now your dashboard should be free and able to be removed from the car. As you can see, the dashboard is a modular unit that can be removed in one piece or installed in one piece.